Released in 1995 for PC MS-DOS format as well as Windows and a variety of others, Williams Arcade Classics is a compilation of 6 Williams arcade games: Bubbles, Joust, Robotron 2084, Sinistar, Defender, and Defender 2. One of these days I'm going to come across a Williams arcade compilation that only has one Defender game. I swear these two are joined by the hip. There's also a bunch of video supplements with the various creators and stuff, but I'm only focusing on the actual games themselves. The videos can be found elsewhere in other compilations and that sort of thing, so who cares? From the get-go, Williams Arcade Classics scores points in presentation, as the main interface isn't just a mere menu, but a faithful recreation of an 80s video arcade, conveniently only featuring Williams arcade games. You can use the mouse to pick a game and navigate to 2 screens of arcade, or you could just use the keyboard shortcuts to access the game you want to play rather quickly. Of course, once you pick a game, you're taken to this woefully generic DOS-style menu, where you can map your keyboard settings or calibrate your game controller. Piece of advice if you plan on playing this: don't use the keyboard. The whole thing plays awkwardly, especially games like Defender or Robotron. Stick with a decent controller and you'll be fine. Well, aside from Robotron, since it was a twin stick thing, but the game does allow for 2 joysticks to be used if you want or are able to go that route. I'd imagine that would be dependent on the capabilities of your computer, whether it be a modern thing or a DOS thing from back in 1990X or something. I don't know, but I digress. So the 6 games featured here should be relatively familiar fare for old school arcade enthusiasts, since they've appeared in a number of compilations before and since. You have the perennial classic Defender, where you're defending the human colony against alien invaders, and this is a solid emulation of the classic game, with the player explosion looking particularly smooth. Again, playing this with a controller is recommended because the keyboard setup, no matter how you map it, is kinda rubbish. Defender 2, or Stargate as it was once known, is pretty much the same game with additional gimmicks such as new enemies and a new Stargate system that allows you to warp to different parts of the surface. Both games are pretty much the same deal at its core, and I'm still equally horrible at both of them. It's just a thing. And then we have Joust, or as some people would call it, Bird Ass. The classic game where you fly an ostrich and kill other ostrich-flying jousters with either your lance or your bird's posterior. 9 times out of 10, it's usually the latter. It works just fine. It does tend to stutter a bit when much is going on, but it's not horrible, and on a whole, it's Joust. It's a fine recreation of the game, and certainly a far cry from the Dave Sharpless shareware version. Robotron 2084... If you could find 2 joysticks working on this thing, you could recreate that classic feel and play this tough shooter the way it was meant to be played. The 2-button setup or the keypad usage is far from adequate, and Sinistar plays about as well as you'd expect it, whether you're an ace Cinnabomb miner or an absolute lost cause. Again, raising my hand here in the latter. Now, sticking within the time frame of this game's release, this is the same set of 5 games you could find on the Williams Arcade's Greatest Hits compilation for the Super NES and the Sega Mega Drive. One game those compilations lack but you could find here, and the PlayStation version, is Bubbles. This is an interesting little game where you move a bubble around a sink to clean up grime and other things. This will gradually cause your bubble to grow bigger and be happier along the way, because the bigger the happier you are, I guess. I don't know. It's nothing special, but after a while it does start to grow on you. Somewhat. For the most part, the games are almost arcade perfect as far as the emulation / conversion / ports / whatever you want to call it goes, circa 1995. The graphics and sounds are pretty much spot on, and there's even a key that lets you insert coins, even though that is a completely superfluous and worthless feature, considering you could just press the start button to start your game without having to insert any coins. Like I said before, control with the joystick is pretty much the way to go here. The only downside to this is that you're stuck with whatever button mapping scheme they threw at you. There's no joystick button configuration option you could do, but for the most part, joystick commands are pretty good. You can remap keyboard commands, but the keyboard commands are somewhat awkward for some of these games that they're simply not worth the effort. Also, if you're looking for customization such as difficulty settings or the like, you won't find them here, unfortunately, so what you see is pretty much what you get. Overall, trying to suggest whether Williams Arcade Classics is worth your time seems like a waste of time, as almost all of these games have been featured and included in the various Williams and Midway compilation packs over the years, and I'm pretty sure the videos included here can be found elsewhere. That, and the presence of things like MAME for those who want to go that route, makes this DOS version of Williams Arcade Classics somewhat archaic and unneeded. That having been said, however, I've been somewhat impressed by the quality of these games considering the time frame it was released. They play mostly well within what was possible at the time, they look the part, they sound the part, and run fairly decently for the most part. All in all, a solid offering of classic arcade games for the late DOS era.